Hey everybody, we're the Sporting Couple, and today's topic, training camp hell. Not for the players, but for the fans. That's who training camp is really hell for. We're all hungry and jonesing
Always.
for football at this time of the year, so we're willing to latch on to these training
Anything.
camp stories when they're usually all pretty much garbage. But this is what we have to talk about because we're sure as hell not going to talk about baseball.
You're right.
We have one of the topics I wanted to bring up was Patrick Ryan Fitzpatrick, finally signs with the Jets. This has been the most pointless holdout. Pardon me, it's been a strange contract negotiation where Fitzpatrick has had absolutely zero leverage.
Yeah.
His leverage was, oh yeah, we'll start Geno Smith and see what happens. And I mean, that's not that big a threat. Like, Geno is certainly not a great player, but neither is Ryan Fitzpatrick.
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the big problem in my opinion, is Fitzpatrick is a very average to below average quarterback.
I mean, he can throw some passes.
He had 15 interceptions, which tied him for 5th in the league. He was tied for 10th in touchdowns. So he did okay throwing them. He was actually tied with Aaron Rodgers. But the difference was Rodgers only threw 8 interceptions.
Yeah, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, Rodgers only threw 8 interceptions, but the most damning stat of all on Ryan Fitzpatrick is 6.9 yards per attempt. That is minuscule. Now, Rodgers had a very similar number, but once again, you can throw those shorter passes if you're not going to throw picks. If you throw 15 picks and you're not torching teams down the field,
Totally different problems.
yeah,
too.
you're a below average quarterback. That's
Yeah.
basically what I'm saying. Like, there's just not a whole lot to him. I really don't know. You know, the Jets ended up offering $12 million, which I guess, considering the rate quarterbacks get paid, that's somewhat fair for him. I think like the only guy lower on the rung after that is RG3. So I think he's a better quarterback. I think RG3 might be a better quarterback, but Ryan Fitzpatrick won't turn to dust if he's hit hard
Right.
in the pocket. So he is a better player in that respect. It's just following the story has been sort of ludicrous, with like he's like, well, I want more money, and Jets are like, all right.
Yeah.
And I believe this situation came down to at 7:00 on last Friday. They were like, hey, listen, we got $12 million a year, take the deal or it's over. And he probably came running into the Jets facility at 6:59 going, hey, is the deal still good? Okay, I'll sign that. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
sign
because he
that.
wants to get paid. He wants to have a job. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, they were just probably willing to let him go.
Yeah, otherwise he was going to be the backup to like Tony Romo or something in Dallas.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's all he had left was a backup or trying to compete with a young quarterback, which I know is something he probably didn't want to do. Denard Hopkins was another interesting one.
Yeah.
He has a 48-hour holdout,
Yeah, a little mini holdout.
which may go down as one of the shortest holdouts in history without a player actually accomplishing something. But I think he's a player that should have accomplished something. You watched the Texans last year. We both did.
Yeah.
Was he not the only bright spot for that offense last year?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, because once again,
With the Texans. I mean, remember that. That's a Texans team.
I have some stats here, as I always like to have stats. Brian Hoyer, Ryan Mallett, and the Weed Man, Brian Whedon, were the 3 guys throwing him passes. Okay, let that be said right now, as I let you know that Hopkins was 3rd in yards, 7th in touchdowns, with a truly terrible quarterback play.
Yeah, I know.
I understand those guys had some nice games, but they had nice games because Hopkins is dominant. He's a top 5 receiver, and he's
Absolutely.
set to make $1 million this year.
It's sickening.
Yeah, it's a low amount of money. I know I've heard it all week from people who've been like, well, he signed a contract. He's got to honor that contract. And I think that's a bunch of malarkey. And the
Right.
simple reason I say that is there's no way if a player underperforms his contract that an owner and GM's not going to find a way to get out from underneath
Right.
that contract and just throw it aside. So if the owners don't abide by it, I mean, I would tell any player, like, hold out, go get your money, because you never know what's going to happen. Right now Hopkins is worth $12 to $15 million
He is
a
that
year.
good.
He's that kind of player, probably more. But, he is not able to get it because of his contract situation and how the draft works out and how these guys are slotted.
So
Yeah.
actually, this brings us to my team, the Packers.
The Packers.
I've got to bring up some stuff that I'm concerned about. Some stuff that I've heard out of training camp. Devontae Adams is once again struggling. He really struggled last year, and I am not a person for stats, but let me just go through some of this. He had 50 receptions for 483 yards. He scored 1 touchdown last season. He was supposed to be kind of a guy. Jordy Nelson was out, obviously, and it really let loose some of our huge weaknesses. I mean, Aaron Rodgers basically had no one to throw to. I had him on my fantasy team, which he has taught me a lesson to stream quarterbacks this year. But yeah, I had him on my fantasy team. I picked him because he is an amazing quarterback who produces and who gets stuff done.
Yeah.
And he had nobody to throw to. So I'm looking forward to Jordy Nelson being back. Another thing to say about Davante Adams is a lot of times last season he looked out of place. He looked like he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah,
he wasn't a good route runner.
He led the league in muttering "my bad" in the huddle, I believe, because there was a lot of poor routes. There was a lot of missed, drop balls. I mean, he just stunk. There's no other way to put it. And
awful.
It exposed something that a team never really wants exposed, is that Aaron Rodgers is leaving his prime.
Yeah.
And that's, and that, I'm not saying he's done. He still has lots of good years left where he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But you saw in Carolina where they had atrocious wide receiver play. That didn't matter. Cam Newton went out there and dominated anyway.
Absolutely.
And that was something Rodgers wasn't able to really do last year. He was able to get him into the playoffs, but he really wasn't able to do much else with the situation. And I mean that's something you don't want exposed, and that's what happened when Jordy Nelson left. And trust me, like, Jordy Nelson is not a top 5 wide receiver. Like, he's not a Denard Hopkins or a Des Bryant or Julio Jones. He's not that kind of guy.
He can run routes. He's fast.
Yeah.
And he makes production for my team. The other thing I want to bring up is Mike McCarthy, the head coach. When are we going to start holding him accountable for some of this? We've had him for several years, and that's a staple of the Packer franchise, is we like to hold on to people. But I wasn't real impressed. I was not real impressed with a lot of his play calls and his decisions.
Mike McCarthy is probably one of the least respected Super Bowl winning coaches in the history of the NFL.
He deserves respect, but with the league like it is, I mean, there's so many coaches that get fired after not having a good season, not having one good season.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that he necessarily needs to be fired, but we need to take another look at this guy.
I think it's always a fun thing to take a look back 5 years later to take a look at the reasoning of why coaches were held on to. Not fired, but why some coaches were given opportunities to stay with the team.
And I really think it's a loyalty thing with the Packers.
Yeah, like in 2 years, I'm going to make a great video about Jason Garrett's very meh era in Dallas. But there's a number of coaches who've had opportunities like that, and you're just kind of like, why is that guy still there?
Yeah.
But, and that's, I mean, I give Mike McCarthy a little bit more leeway. He's shown some good stuff on offense. But we have to see something else from that team this year. Like, they've got to be able to live up to potential, because it's not a great division, and they could easily win it, and they can't stumble like they did
And we
last year.
cannot rely on Aaron Rodgers to bail everyone out. I mean, he is a fantastic quarterback, one of a definite Hall of Famer, but, you just can't rely on your quarterbacks all the time.
It's very true. Very true. And to end it, I want to talk about one of the least probably worst run teams, or certainly one of the worst GMs in the NFL, and that's talking about the Chargers and their holdout with Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa is a 3rd-round pick, and his holdout is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Sickening.
And if you're unfamiliar, the reason I'm saying it's ridiculous is because players are now slotted to receive a certain amount of money
I know.
as to where they're drafted. So there's not a lot to negotiate. It's not one of those issues to where, it's like he's holding out for a certain amount of money. That's not an option. What the issue here is the GM, Tom Telesco, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I hope I have the right guy. Pardon me if he's like the GM for the Padres, and I just got all confused. But what the holdout issue is the opt-out option on his contract, which basically means if they sign this guy if they draft him as a 3rd-round pick and he doesn't live up to expectations, The Chargers will owe him more money if they cut him.
Such bullshit.
They're arguing to get out from underneath that money in case their GM stinks at his job and they drafted the wrong guy.
How is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it should be one of those things like, if that comes up, you have bigger problems than having to pay this guy a few more $1 million
No
when
kidding.
he leaves your team. It's an absolutely absurd reason for a guy to be holding out. And we're in almost at the end of that first week of training camp, and this guy is still not signed. It's absolutely ridiculous, and somehow a situation that I think only the Chargers can find themselves in, because maybe saying the worst run team is unfair, but they're certainly one of the league's cheapest.
Yeah.
You know, and that never looks good. And they need good PR. They had this whole moving to LA thing blow up in their face. It's kind of a
No
disaster.
kidding.
I mean, I can't imagine, like, as a fan, how you're not, like, hanging by a rope in your closet
I
at this
know.
point. Yeah. I mean, you have nothing to hold on to. At this point, your team wants to get the hell away from you as fast as they can.
It's sad.
It's a shame these are our training camp issues to talk about. We're happy to be talking some football, but we'd really love to be talking some substantial football. So hopefully in the coming weeks here, we're going to start breaking down division by division, talking about who we think is going to be the top teams and who our sleepers are. And we're going to make some wild playoff predictions. I'm sure they'll be wrong, and people
Yeah.
will throw back in our faces. Come
Not
playoff
my
time.
area. That's your area.
Oh yeah, because last year I was so brilliant thinking that the Baltimore Ravens and the Cowboys might square off in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, but you're a lot better than I am.
But yeah, before that, I nailed the Super Bowl matchup 2 years in a row.
Definitely want to talk fantasy as well.
Yeah, we're going to talk some fantasy as well. It's a little early to talk fantasy because we got to see how the main reason you want to pay attention to training camp, injuries, because that's what really affects your
Yeah.
fantasy. But we'll be talking to you more about in the